August 13, 1942. The Atlantic stretched gray and unbroken beneath a low, iron sky. Waves sloshed against the hulls of Allied supply ships, endless in their monotony, while the distant roar of a U-boat's diesel motor seemed impossibly small against the vastness of the ocean. Somewhere beyond the horizon, men trained to think of themselves as hunters were about to become the hunted, and the weapon that would turn the tide looked, at first glance, almost laughably innocuous. A wooden crate, bobbing lazily in the swell, unarmed, ordinary, and utterly deadly. In a cramped lab near the River Thames, a handful of engineers and naval tacticians huddled over sketches of crates that were more than mere timber boxes. Their leader, Lieutenant Commander Harold Fenwick, rubbed the bridge of his nose and muttered, "If the Kriegsmarine knew what we were about to do, they'd laugh. Or cry. Probably both." Fenwick's team had spent months devising a floating mine that mimicked debris, so mundane that even a seasoned U-boat captain would dismiss it as driftwood. Yet beneath its rough-hewn planks lay explosives designed to twist a submarine hull, as if it were made of paper. Across the ocean, aboard U-123, Captain Lieutenant Klaus Richter scanned the horizon, his brow furrowed beneath the dim glow of the periscope. His orders were simple: patrol the shipping lanes, sink what he could, and return. But the Atlantic had grown capricious, and Richter's confidence was brittle. "We are kings of the sea," he told his first officer, though even the words rang hollow. The men had grown accustomed to the subtle menace of depth charges and torpedo nets, but nothing had prepared them for the invisible enemy that drifted with the tide, silent and patient. The first encounter was anticlimactic on the surface, terrifying beneath it. A crate, no larger than a modest supply chest, nudged against the sub's hull. Richter noted its unremarkable appearance and laughed softly, shaking his head. "A bit of driftwood," he said. "Hardly worth a glance." Moments later, a shudder ran through the vessel. Metal groaned. A muffled explosion rattled the control room. Richter's laughter died, replaced by the taut, cold fear of men who know their world has shifted in a single heartbeat. On deck, Fenwick's team tracked reports of U-boat losses with meticulous attention, each incident a mixture of relief and disbelief. 12 submarines down, and still the crates drifted, almost innocuous, almost ridiculous. Each report carried the same pattern: officers baffled, crews shaken, and ships formerly hunted now hunting back in the most unexpected way. Fenwick allowed himself a dry smile. "They underestimated the power of ordinary things," he murmured. "A crate, a box, a piece of timber, sometimes that's all it takes." Witnesses, men who survived the initial shock, recalled the moments in vivid, almost hallucinatory detail. Seaman Carl Muller described the sensation as a sudden tearing inside the belly of the sea. One moment you breathe normally, the next the floor rises to meet you, and the walls groan like old wood under storm. These were men trained to anticipate danger, yet nothing in their manuals prepared them for the silent, patient menace drifting with the current. From the perspective of the Allies, the operation was a quiet triumph, proof that ingenuity often outweighed brute force. The crates moved without guidance, yet with deadly precision, carried by the ocean itself, as if the water conspired in secret with the engineers who had designed them. Every bob, every roll on the swell, held the promise of chaos for those who thought the sea was their ally. There was irony in it, sharp and almost cruel. Hitler's U-boats, feared across the Atlantic, symbols of technological prowess and naval dominance, were undone not by advanced torpedoes or radar-breaking depth charges, but by the simplicity of a wooden box. The juxtaposition was almost humorous in retrospect. A machine designed to intimidate entire fleets, brought low by something that looked like a crate for apples. Yet for the men aboard both sides, there was nothing funny about it. Richter's log recorded confusion and frustration, each line a testament to a changing reality. "We saw nothing," he wrote, "and yet the ocean itself seemed to rise against us." For Fenwick and his team, the success brought cautious satisfaction, tempered by the knowledge that the war was far from over. Each victory was a whisper, not a shout, a reminder that ingenuity, patience, and a willingness to defy expectation could alter the course of history. By the end of that day, the Atlantic had become a theater of subtle terror. Wooden crates drifted like innocuous driftwood, carrying death silently, waiting for the moment to strike. The Allies had demonstrated a simple truth. Sometimes the smallest, most overlooked objects could wield extraordinary power. And yet, the story was only beginning. The ocean was vast, the Kriegsmarine cunning, and what came next, when the Allies would scale the operation beyond imagination, promised to turn the Atlantic into a floating chessboard, each crate a piece with deadly intent. And so, as the sun dipped toward the horizon and the waves glimmered with the last light of August, a new reality took hold in the minds of those who ruled beneath the waves. The sea itself was no longer safe. The hunter could become the hunted, and a humble crate, silent, unassuming, and almost comical, could change the course of a war. November 9, 1942. The Atlantic was a silver-black expanse under a fractured sky, moonlight glinting on restless waves that seemed to hide secrets just below the surface. Hundreds of wooden crates, once experimental curiosities, now drifted in silent formation across the convoy routes, each a floating trap designed to deceive and destroy. The Allies had scaled their ingenuity from isolated incidents to a coordinated, almost industrial campaign, and the Kriegsmarine was beginning to understand, too late, that their mastery of the sea was no longer absolute. Captain Lieutenant Klaus Richter had learned caution the hard way. The first encounters with a single crate had seemed improbable. Now, entire wolf packs were reporting losses without explanation. A familiar fear gripped him as he studied his charts under the dim light of the control room aboard U-123. "Every route we patrol it is lined with them," he muttered to his first officer, a note of disbelief threading his voice. The ocean, once his hunting ground, had become a labyrinth of invisible peril. Far from the German lines, Lieutenant Commander Harold Fenwick monitored reports with the careful attention of a man who knew that success depended on patience as much as ingenuity. Each crate that struck its target, each sub that vanished from the logs, was confirmation that his team's modest lab on the Thames had produced something extraordinary. Fenwick allowed himself a faint smile. The crates were unassuming, almost absurd, yet they were deadly, and the psychological toll on the U-boat crews was becoming as effective as the explosive themselves. Aboard U-456, Captain Lieutenant Dieter Kruger glanced at his sonar readings, saw nothing, and felt the rising tension in the pit of his stomach. The Atlantic, once a familiar adversary, now felt capricious, almost sentient. Every swell, every shift of the current could carry a crate that would rend steel, crush hulls, and shatter confidence. "We chase ghosts," he whispered to his navigator, who gave a hollow laugh, as if humor could stave off the growing dread. In those moments, the mechanical precision of war was no match for the patience of a drifting piece of timber. The effectiveness of the operation was staggering. By early November, estimates suggested that nearly a quarter of U-boat losses in certain sectors were attributable to these floating traps. Each incident was catalogued meticulously by the Admiralty. Logs detailing hull breaches, emergency surface reports, and the few survivors' testimony that read like ghost stories. Seaman Carl Muller's account, recalling a sudden explosion that lifted the sub as though the ocean itself had grown teeth, circulated quietly among officers, each reading a reminder that no innovation in speed, sonar, or torpedo could outmatch the subtle cunning of a well-placed crate. Fenwick's team continued to refine deployment strategies, calculating drift patterns, adjusting explosive charges, and timing the release to maximize both surprise and lethality. Every crate became a miniature ambassador of ingenuity, a paradoxical weapon that relied on inaction, patience, and the unremarkable rhythms of the sea. It was a quiet form of chaos, one that reshaped both strategy and morale. Humor, as ever, hovered at the edges of Fenwick's observations. He would note in his journal, with a dry, almost conspiratorial tone, "Our finest steel-hulled adversaries undone by driftwood. If only we could see the expressions on their faces." It was an ironic contrast. Machines designed for precision and dominance, humbled by the simplest objects, carried by nothing but tides and human foresight. For the men trapped within the submarine hulls, irony was irrelevant. Kruger, shaking from adrenaline and disbelief, recorded in his log, "The ocean is alive. It conspires against us in ways we cannot anticipate." The psychological weight compounded the physical destruction. Fear, uncertainty, and frustration became constant companions, eroding confidence faster than any depth charge. By the end of that night, the Atlantic had become a theater of quiet terror. From above, the crates might have seemed insignificant, scattered wooden blocks, drifting without purpose. But below the surface, they reshaped the balance of power. Allies who had once worried about U-boat supremacy now saw a path to control, leveraging imagination against steel, cunning against brute force. The Kriegsmarine, once confident in its mastery, had begun to recognize the fragility of dominance in an unpredictable environment. As the moon slid behind clouds and waves licked the sides of convoys, a subtle transformation had taken place in both minds and strategies. The floating crates were more than weapons. They were symbols of human ingenuity, proof that adaptability and insight could shift the tide of war. And yet, the operation was far from complete. If a single crate could topple a submarine, what would happen when the ocean itself became a labyrinth of them? The answer lay in the days ahead, in waters still uncharted, and in the minds of men whose confidence had been quietly, irrevocably challenged. The night closed over the Atlantic like a shroud, silent and unbroken, but carrying with it the promise that the next encounter would test the patience, the nerves, and the ingenuity of everyone involved. The crates drifted onward, patient and unremarkable, waiting for the moment when their quiet menace would once again assert the extraordinary power of the ordinary.